So it's now my pleasure to introduce our honorary graduate. So Mr. Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen, His Excellency, the Right Honourable David Johnston, the 28th Governor-General of Canada, is recognized for his distinguished achievement as a national trailblazer in scholarship, public service, Canadian unity, and the nation's national sport, hockey. Born in Sudbury, Ontario, His Excellency received his A.B. degree from Harvard University, graduating magna cum laude in 1963. He then earned an LLB in 1965 from Cambridge University in England, and in 1966 received an LLB from Queen's University in Kingston. He remained at Queen's University as an assistant professor in the Faculty of Law, a position he later held at the University of Toronto Faculty of Law, before becoming a full professor in 1972. In 1974, he became Dean of the Faculty of Law at the University of Waterloo. 5 years later, he was appointed Principal and Vice Chancellor at McGill University. He held that office until 1994. He continued to teach law at McGill until he returned to the University of Waterloo in 1999 to become President and Vice Chancellor there. Recognized as a visionary throughout his career, His Excellency has authored or co-authored over 24 books, as well as numerous reports, academic articles, and conference papers. He is a companion of the Order of Canada. His service to governments and public agencies and his contributions to communities throughout Canada are too numerous to list. He has served academic associations like the Association of Universities and Colleges of Canada and the Association of Commonwealth Universities. He also shared his wisdom and expertise with public institutions, chairing numerous advisory panels, committees, and task forces, such as the National Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy, the National Task Force on High Speed Broadband Access, the Advisory Committee on Online Learning, and the Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. He has also acted as an independent advisor on many task forces. Deftly able to balance athletics with academics, he played defense for Harvard University's hockey team and was a member of the All-American hockey team for 2 seasons in the early 1960s. In 1988, His Excellency was inducted into the Harvard Sports Hall of Fame. At his installation as Governor-General, His Excellency spoke eloquently of the honor of public service and the need for Canada to embrace 3 principles in order to become the smart and caring nation that Canadians desire. Canada, he said, must support families and children. It must also reinforce learning and innovation, and it must encourage philanthropy and volunteerism. The University of Manitoba shares these visionary values with His Excellency, as they are elements in the university's mission to learn, discover, and serve. And to this formal citation, I would like to add a personal note. Along with many others, I consider David Johnston to be a friend and an advisor. He's gifted with wisdom, insight, and the generous capacity to bring people together to complete complex tasks. It's a personal pleasure for me to be recognizing his leadership in our academic community in Canada and in our country more generally. So, Mr. Chancellor, it is an honor for me to ask on behalf of the Senate of the University of Manitoba that you confer upon His Excellency, the Right Honourable David Johnston, the degree of Doctor of Laws, honoris causa.
By virtue of the authority vested in me as Chancellor of this university, I admit you to the degree Doctor of Laws, honoris causa, with all the rights and privileges thereto appertaining. Congratulations, Dr. Johnston.
John. Yep, thank you. Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen and friends, premièrement, je veux dire c'est un plaisir énorme pour moi d'être ici parmi vous et je suis très honoré d'accepter le diplôme d'une université avec la réputation pour l'innovation à travers le pays, comme the University of Manitoba. I'm delighted to be with these wonderful people here in the audience who are graduating today, and I'm also with some dear old friends on the stage, Art Morrow, Arnie Nymark, other people in the audience. They say that Manitoba grows the best wheat in the world, and that is correct. But even more than that, I think it grows the best talent in the world. One convocation of this kind, these are very epic events. Northrop Frye, probably the preeminent intellect at his time, was receiving an honorary degree, and he said to the graduating students, "This is one of the 4 epic events in your life, the other 3 being your birth, your marriage, and your death. This is the only one where you were sufficiently compos mentis to know what is going on, so please enjoy it." David, I loved your remarks about the costumes. We are fortunate to have 5 daughters, and on one occasion when I was the Dean of Law at Western, I was going off to convocation in my robes with that unusual hat. In this case, it was a mortarboard. And our youngest daughter, who was then 3, said, "Daddy, why are you wearing such a crazy costume?" And I said, "Well, I'm going off to the university where I work, and it's sort of a parade that we're in today." A couple months later, she came home from her junior kindergarten. She said, "Daddy, you know that crazy costume with that flat hat and the flowing robes? Could I borrow it tomorrow?" I said, "How come?" She says, "It's Halloween, and there's a prize for the kid with the craziest costumes." You are about to embark on a wonderful new chapter of your life, as Northrop Frye said. And I'd like to tell a story or two, and I'm going to use 3 props. And I'll ask you to kind of guess what I'm going to do with them, because that kind of makes it fun. This is a watch in my hand here. This is a compass that I usually hang around my neck, and I'm not quite sure whether I can get this tie off or not, but let me try, because that's my 3rd prop. The watch. Tie has distinctive colors, and I'll explain those in a moment to you. The watch, of course, monitors time, monitors contribution of effort, monitors how we balance things in life. And let me tell you another story that involves a jar. Just imagine that this glass, in fact, is a jar. And it was the first day of a Philosophy 101, Economics 101, Anatomy 101 course, and the professor came in, and the students were there, and he held up the glass, and he said, "Is this glass empty, or is it full?" "Oh, that's empty, sir." So he reached in the first drawer, and he pulled out an envelope that had rocks in it, and he filled it up to the top. "Full or empty?" "Full now, sir." Second drawer, pulled out an envelope, had some pebbles. Put them in. "Empty or full now?" "Oh, it's really full now, sir." Third drawer, envelope with some sand in it. Sand in, shake it around. "Really full now, sir." Then he reached down to the bottom and pulled out a can of Diet Coke and poured it in. "Is it empty or full now?" "It's really full now, sir." So he said, "Why am I asking you these questions?" "Well, let me give you an answer." He says, "This is an exercise in critical thinking. Because when I first held up that glass and it did not have any rocks or other things in it, you said it was empty. In fact, it was filled with air. Not filled with rocks, but filled with air. So in one sense, it's empty. In the other sense, it's full. And so your answer to a particular question depends on the presumptions that you bring and the amount of information you add to that. And that's an exercise in critical thinking, isn't it? What are your assumptions? But he said there's a more important truth that I have for you about this jar. Consider that your life is now you're embarking upon this new epic university, and as you graduates are embarking on the epic of your next step into the life beyond. And in a sense, it's a vessel that's partly filled and partly empty. The rocks represent the really important things in life. It's your own sense of self-worth. It's your sense of caring for other people. It's the values that motivate you. It's your regard for your community. It's the essential things that go to make up a worthwhile person and a worthwhile community. The pebbles? Well, the pebbles are getting your homework done on time. If you have an assignment, doing it thoughtfully. If you're a member of a 4-person team, don't you be the weakest one of the 4. You be the strongest one of the 4. It's doing those responsibilities that we're expected to do and doing them well and cheerfully. Sand, that's just stuff. That's just hanging out. That's just passing the time of day. So what I want you to do is be sure you get the rocks in your jar, and then the pebbles, and only after that the sand. Because if you fill it up with the sand, there's no room for the pebbles and no room for the rocks. And then, good professor that he was, he paused and he waited for a minute, for 2 minutes, and then finally one brave girl put up her hand and said, "Sir, what about the Diet Coke?" He says, "That's just to remind you that there's always time to sit down and have a cool drink with a good friend." The compass is a little more complex. Compass is a very physical thing that helps us find directions. And I use it simply to remind ourselves and remind you that we need a moral compass in our life. Now, I'm not here today to tell you the particular set of morals or values that you should use to guide your life. But I am here to tell you that you should have such a set of values, such a moral philosophy to guide your steps. And one of the reasons for that is it's a very lonely world if you're the only person that is important in it, and you don't have that guiding compass to send you in the direct direction. One of my favorite lines from Shakespeare is from Hamlet, and it is Polonius who plays the fool in Shakespeare's plays. Shakespeare was very clever. The fool often spoke very clever things and played a very wise role in complicated circumstances. And Polonius was the fool, and his son was going off from Denmark to study in Germany, embarking off to university. And his advice to his son, amongst other things, was, "To thine own self be true, and it shall follow as the night the day, that thou canst not then be false to anyone. To thine own self be true." And the true, of course, is those values that provide your moral compass. And when you find difficult choices in life, and you will from time to time, very often they become quite easy when you look at that moral compass and you look at being true to yourself and you make the choice accordingly. The tie, this tie happens to be a tie of the Governor General's foot guards. Those are the wonderful young men and women who actually protect Rideau Hall, the home of the people of Canada, where my wife and I live, the Governor General and his wife. On parade, you'll see them with the large bearskin caps and the red uniform. They're very picturesque. But that is the Governor General's own regiment. And for me, that's very important. These are people who are loyal to an institution. And so I wear that tie quite regularly. And when I was at my last university, the University of Waterloo, and McGill University before that, I always wore a university tie. And I did so because I was so proud of the institution I represented. It was part of my inner soul. I felt so privileged to serve that institution. I felt a loyalty to it. And that gave me great satisfaction in my life, coming in each day knowing that I was doing what I could to enhance the strength of that institution and help it to do its work better. And I suggest to you that you will find the same thing if you develop loyalty to institutions and to causes that build your communities and make them stronger for all around you. A couple stories that illustrate that. I was a dean of the law school at the University of Western Ontario for 5 wonderful years, and the great thing about being a dean of a faculty is tend to be small enough that you can get to know all the students. I actually would memorize, we'd have 150 kids in first year, and I'd memorize, in those days we had photographs, the names and the photographs of 15 students for 10 days before, so that by opening day I could call someone by their first name and say, "Oh yes, you're from Montreal, or you're from Vancouver," etc. Of course, the kids would get quite nervous about that because he's already got the book on me and I've only arrived. But it was to say, you are a person, part of an institution that is very important. And in speaking about loyalty to that institution and that profession, which is the profession of law, the rule of law in our society, the rules that make people free, I would say we're so fortunate to be able to serve a profession that has very idealistic causes at our roots. And so I ask you to do one thing for me, I'd say to the students on first day. When you are in practice, and I know you'll all be wonderfully successful, commit 10% of your time, minimum, for pro bono work, for work that doesn't remunerate you in the financial sense. And I guarantee you, as much as you enjoy the other 90%, you'll enjoy the 10% even more. I can't tell you how many, many times after that, former students of mine have come up to me and said, "You know, Dean, you remember that speech you gave us on the first day about the 10%? Well, I've never managed to do quite 10%. It's more like 4 or 5%, but you are right." it gives me more satisfaction than anything else, because I'm serving an institution, the rule of law that's so precious in our society. Let me tell another story that has to do with how organizations have changed, and how this concept of loyalty in all its manifestations is important. This was a story that Malcolm Gladwell told at the University of Waterloo a couple years ago. Malcolm's dad, Malcolm is the New York Times writer, the author of Blink and so many other great studies of society today. His dad's a professor of civil engineering with us. And Malcolm gave a very short speech on changing organizations, and he said a few months ago he'd been in Montreal at CAE, that great Canadian electronics company that makes about 70% of the flight simulators used around the world to train pilots. He was watching a pilot and co-pilot in a simulator, and the simulation was of a two-engine aircraft, a Boeing 737 or an Airbus 320, that had taken off from the runway, was airborne, and lost an engine. And the pilots had to take it up, bring it around, empty some fuel, and bring 150 people safely to land. At the end of the half-hour exercise, he said, I was dripping wet with sweat and emotion. And the pilot and co-pilot inside were even more dripping wet. And there were three features of what happened in that half hour, which, granted magnified, but still represent what is happening more and more in our modern post-industrial knowledge economy society, which is quite different than things we've known in the past. The first is that each of those two pilots were using their cognitive capacities to the very maximum, reading the gauges and instruments and signs on that extensive dashboard in front of them. They were right at the limit of their capacity to absorb, process, digest, and put into effective knowledge data. The second thing was that information had to pass seamlessly between them, very quickly, without a lot of interpretation, with magnificent communication, without a flaw. And the third was the absence of hierarchy. Yes, there was a pilot and a co-pilot, but the co-pilot had to be in a position to trump the instructions of a pilot if he, the co-pilot, or she, the co-pilot, had better information. And the basis of that was trust in one another. Trust in their cognitive capacity, that they were trained to use it. Trust in their ability to pass information seamlessly from one to another. And trust that one could contradict the other if the circumstances were right. Depuis mon installation, j'invite les Canadiens à se joindre à moi pour imaginer ce que pourrait être notre pays. Nous cherchons à devenir une nation éclairée et bienveillante, où tous les Canadiens peuvent réussir, contribuer au mieux-être de la société et développer leur plein potentiel. Nous voulons que le Canada soit un pays qui accroît et met en application les connaissances de ses citoyens afin de pouvoir améliorer le sort de tous, tant au pays qu'à l'étranger. We envisage a smart and caring Canada. To achieve this vision, as David said earlier, we've set out three pillars: families and children, learning and innovation, and encouraging philanthropy and volunteerism, and that will be part of your life as you go forward. Just as education shapes who we become, we have the power to shape our communities. In 2017, our country will celebrate the 100th anniversary of this great and blessed and precious experiment, which is Canada. This milestone is a wonderful opportunity to envisage the nation we desire and to map out how we get there. Let me just end this with two very specific suggestions to you as you say adieu to this remarkable institution, which is the University of Manitoba. One is that throughout your lifetime, exercise your right to vote. The taxpayer of Canada has invested a great deal in your intelligence, your ability to process information, and to make good decisions. Federally, provincially, municipally, vote, and be sure that your learning is put at the use of all Canadians. Secondly, as you think of what this university has done for this province and for this community, realize that you are now stewards of this university, and watch over it with care and give back generously within your means each year, financially, so it can be better for the students who come after you. Let me leave you with my two favorite lines from George Bernard Shaw. Some people see things as they are and wonder why. We dream of things that ought to be and ask why not. Merci.